So in previous sessions now, we've shown you how to create contacts and products in the KiuERP system. Using those contacts and products, I'll show you how to purchase and sell using the KiuERP system. To start, I'll give you a quick introduction to the purchasing module. After that, we'll cover some important terminology that you'll need to know to work with it in this module. Next, I'll show you a chart which explains the workflow in Kiu and how all of the different features of the purchases module interact. Then we'll walk through a demonstration of the purchases module and show you how that workflow looks in a real application. We'll finish up with a quick review of the topics we've covered. Let's get started. First, we should ask, what is the Kiu purchases module? The answer is that when you have a business need for a product, this module allows you to identify the price you'll pay for that product by requesting quotes from different suppliers. It allows you to order products from your suppliers and allows you to receive the product into your warehouse when it is delivered by your supplier and create draft vendor bills to be validated by your accounting department. Authorized users within the purchasing department in your company will have access to the purchases module. In order of how we will cover them today, we'll talk about several different lessons. There are 6 important topics, including creating a request for quote, purchase tender, blanket order, and purchase order, receiving goods into your warehouse, and finally creating a draft supplier bill. Now that we know the topics we'll cover during this training, let me explain a few of the key terms I'll be using. A request for quotation is used to ask for a quote from your company's vendors. A purchase agreement is an agreement with one or more vendors in the form of a purchase tender or blanket order. A purchase tender, also known as a call for bids, contains multiple RFQs sent to multiple suppliers. The best offer or offers will win your business. A blanket order is an agreement where buyers can place multiple orders for deliveries, but at the same negotiated price within a given time period. A purchase order is an official order placed with your vendors to buy a product or service. An incoming shipment is the products you ordered which will be received to your warehouse. And lastly, vendor bills are the bills issued by your supplier to your company. The standard workflow for purchasing using the KiuERP system begins with a business need for a product. Once your company has demonstrated a need to acquire a product or service, and you do not know the pricing or other terms to acquire that product, you can initiate the purchase process with a request for quotation, often referred to as an RFQ. An RFQ is a type of procurement solicitation in which your company invites a supplier to bid on providing specific products or services. In the KiuERP system, the request for quotation is used to send your list of desired products to your supplier. Once your supplier has answered your request with a price and other terms, you can choose to proceed with the offer and purchase or to turn down the offer. A request for quotation is used to establish a price for goods or services between your company and a single supplier. If you would like to receive quotes from a greater number of suppliers, you should utilize a purchase tender. A purchase tender, also known as a call for bids, is used to drive competition between several suppliers in order to get the best offers for a list of products. In comparison to the RFQ, a purchase tender is sent to multiple suppliers, stating that they are each competing with one another and that the best offer will win. The main interest is that it usually leads to better offers. If you know the supplier for your product and you are satisfied with the price they have offered you, you can create a blanket order. For a blanket order, you can lock an offer for a specified time period with one supplier, for example, for 1 year, and order multiple times without additional requests for quote or other negotiation. Once you have established a price for your product from your supplier, either from a request for quotation or a purchase tender or a blanket order, you can proceed to issue a purchase order. The purchase order, often referred to simply as a PO, is the actual order that you place to the supplier that you selected, either through an RFQ, a purchase tender, or a blanket order, or when you know the supplier and price in advance and don't need to request any quotations. In the last case, you can start by proceeding directly to a purchase order. Once you have created and confirmed a purchase order, your supplier will deliver your products as agreed. Within the KiuERP system, this creates an incoming shipment. Along with the incoming shipment, you will receive an invoice from your supplier called a vendor bill. When you receive an incoming shipment, compare it to the vendor bill to validate that you have received the products you will pay for. Now that we've established the purchasing process within the KiuERP system, let's proceed with a few demonstrations. As you can see in our workflow chart, we'll start with the request for quotations process. Now that you see where we are in the process, we'll switch to the KiuERP system. Starting from the main module screen, select the Purchases module. The module will open to a list of requests for quotation. To create a new RFQ, select the Create button in the top left. If you are in another section of the Purchases module and need to create an RFQ, use the drop-down menu at the top and click on the Purchases tab, and then click Request for Quotation. After you click the Create button, you will see the new Request for Quotation screen. Select your supplier in the vendor menu or create it on the fly by clicking Create and Edit. The vendor reference field can be filled with the reference to a purchase agreement. The order date field should be filled with the date before which the quotation should be validated and converted into a purchase order. If you have an existing purchase tender and want to add another quote to the order, you can do so either within the purchase tender itself, which we will cover later, or by linking them using the purchase tender reference in the purchase agreement field. You can also set the currency of this request for quotation using the currency field. Now that we've covered the initial settings, let's look at the Products tab below. This is where you can tell a vendor what product you would like them to quote. Click on Add an Item here. Using the drop-down menus, select a product you wish to order from the Product column. We can also start to type the name of any product, and it will populate. We can specify the quantity by inserting the number and selecting the unit of measure. We can also add the expected delivery date in the scheduled date field. Now that we've completed the Product tab, let's switch to the Deliveries and Invoices tab. If you entered an expected delivery date on the Product tab, you can override that date for all of your products by entering a different date on the Scheduled Date field. The Delivered To field allows you to select the destination of your shipment. For your company, the default will be your company name, followed by receipts, which is how you will receive material into your warehouse. If you'd prefer to send the product directly from your vendor to your customer, select Dropship from the drop-down menu, and the Dropship address field will appear. This can be filled with your customer's address. Incoterms refers to international commercial terms, which are a series of predefined commercial terms used in international transactions. Similarly, the payment terms can be predefined, or if you leave the field blank, your vendor can propose terms in their quotation. If you know that you are subject to certain taxes or otherwise have a unique fiscal position, you can also use the fiscal position field to provide that information to your supplier. When you have finished entering all of your information into the request for quotation form, click the Save button at the top left. Now we can select either Print RFQ or Send RFQ by email. Okay. If you're going to send the RFQ by email, make sure an email address is specified for the supplier or enter a new one. After having clicked Print RFQ or Send RFQ by email, you will notice in the top right a change will appear. The status has changed from RFQ to RFQ sent, which means that the RFQ has been provided to the supplier. When your supplier has replied to your RFQ with a quote, you will have to update the quote with the information they have provided. You can come back to this RFQ screen and select the appropriate RFQ from the list by clicking on it. After we clicked on the RFQ in the list, the view changes to show our RFQ here with all of its details. We can click Edit in the top left to populate the quote with new information provided by our supplier, such as the price, any taxes, expected delivery lead time, payment terms, or any other information the supplier has given you. Then click Save again. Now that we've added all of our information, including a quantity and a unit price, we can save our request for quotation again. If you are satisfied with your changes and want to proceed with the offer from the vendor, you can proceed by clicking Confirm Order here at the top, which will issue the purchase order to your vendor. The status of the RFQ will change to Purchase Order now in the top right, and the icons in the upper right corner of the order will show 1 shipment and 0 vendor bills. That's the process for creating an RFQ using the KiuERP system. Let's switch back to our workflow before we proceed. An RFQ is best used when you have never purchased a product from a particular supplier and don't know the price they will offer you. When you recognize a business need for a new product, but want to invite multiple suppliers to compete with one another on the price, or when you need to make a public offer, a purchase tender can be used. To show you how to create a purchase tender, let's switch back to the KiuERP system. From within the Purchases module, select the Purchases drop-down menu at the top, and then click on Purchase Agreements. When the Purchase Agreement window appears, click the Create button, and a new Purchase Agreement window will open. This view will look very similar to the Request for Quotation view that we worked with before. In the Agreement Type field, choose Purchase Tender. You do not have to define a vendor at this time. In the Product section, click Add an Item. We've added our desired product in the product list, and then we can update the quantity. We can add as many products as we want to this list. When we've defined the products we want to purchase, click on Confirm at the top to finish. Now that I've created a purchase tender, I can create individual requests for quote within the purchase tender. Click on the button New Quotation, and an RFQ will be created with the products chosen on the purchase tender. We can choose a vendor, then send the RFQ to that vendor, as with a standard request for quotation. Let's repeat this for one more vendor. Once all of the requests for quote are sent, you can click Validate on the purchase tender. The vendors will send their offers, and you can update their requests for quotation accordingly. Then choose the ones you want to accept by clicking on Confirm Order for one or more of the RFQs and cancel on the others. We can see the RFQs by clicking within the purchase tender to see all of our requests for quote. Let's click on one of them, and we can choose to confirm order. And now we can go back to the request for quote within this purchase tender, and you can see one has changed to purchase order and one is still on RFQ sent. And we can choose to cancel on this one. And now you see one purchase order and one canceled. Now when we go back to the purchase tender, we can click Done on the purchase tender, and the status will change to Done. That's the process for creating a purchase tender using the KiuERP system. Let's switch back to our workflow again before we proceed. Now let's talk about another way of initiating a purchase process. A blanket order is similar to a framework contract, where you lock in a good price with a vendor for a period of time and plan multiple deliveries during that interval. A blanket order is a second kind of purchase agreement, but is different from a purchase tender. A purchase tender is sent to multiple suppliers, where a blanket order is sent to only a single supplier. A purchase tender is used for only a single delivery, where the blanket order is used to convert to cover multiple deliveries. In a purchase tender, the quantities are set automatically on the purchase order, while with a blanket order, you will set those quantities manually on the PO. And lastly, after using a purchase tender, we will have only a single purchase order, while with a blanket order, you will have used multiple purchase orders. Creating a blanket order is very similar to the purchase tender step that we have just demonstrated. We'll switch back to the KiuERP system and using the Purchases drop-down menu, navigate to the Purchase Agreements page. At the Purchase Agreements page, we'll click Create again. This time in the Agreement Type field, we'll choose Blanket Order. In the Supplier field, we can select the vendor we intend to purchase from. In the Product tab below, click on Add an Item to add one or more products. We can select a quantity, which will be the sum of all deliveries to be covered by this blanket agreement, and add the negotiated price in the unit price column. When you have completed filling in these details, click Confirm. Let's go back to our flowchart again. Now you can start creating different purchase orders with multiple scheduled delivery dates within the agreed period, all linked to this blanket order. This way, you can easily track how many products you have ordered within a particular agreement and the quantity remaining with that vendor. So far, we've shown you how to create a request for quotation and a purchase tender with several RFQs included, sent those requests to suppliers, and then used the return quotations to update our request before finally placing a purchase order with the supplier. We've also shown that you can create a blanket order for a product where you have established the price for a product and want to be able to order the same product multiple times at the same price within a set amount of time. However, if you already know the price of the item you want to purchase and you only intend to purchase one time, you can skip the request for quotation, purchase tender, and blanket order and proceed directly to creating a purchase order. We'll switch back to the KiuERP system and I'll show you how. Within the Purchases module again, we'll click on the Purchase drop-down menu at the top and select Purchase Orders. The system will now open to a list of purchase orders. The list shows all purchase orders created. The status field can be waiting bill, bills received, or nothing to bill for canceled orders. Waiting bill means that the purchase order has already been confirmed, and bills received means that the vendor bill has been created. If you want to view an existing purchase order, you can choose the PO from the list. To create a new purchase order, click on the Create button. When we click Create, we'll see a screen very similar to the Request for Quotation form. The only difference between the Request for Quotation and the purchase order views is the addition of the columns Received Quantity and Billed Quantity. These columns are always 0 with a new purchase order. When you have an existing purchase order where only a subset of the ordered items are delivered, and then you will see the net difference noted in these columns. The Received Quantity column will show the number you have received, and the Billed Quantity column will show the number of items your company has received an invoice for. To finalize the purchase order, you can click on the Confirm Order button, which will initiate the purchase from your supplier and is the last step to creating a purchase order. Before we proceed, let's switch again back to the workflow. So far, we've shown 4 ways that will allow you to order from a supplier. First, you can request a quotation and purchase the product in response. Second, you can create a purchase tender, obtain multiple quotes, and then order the product in response to those quotes. Third, you can create a blanket order and receive products in multiple shipments from your vendor. And fourth, you can purchase a product directly using a purchase order where you know the product price and vendor in advance. At the end of these methods, when the supplier sends you the shipment, you will have to receive the products and register their invoice with a vendor bill. Let's talk about how to receive products. Using the Purchase drop-down menu, select Purchase Orders. And now that we see the purchase orders list, we'll select one of the purchase orders by clicking on it. When the purchase order opens, you will notice the shipment and vendor bill icons in the top right of the screen. If we click on the shipment button, the details of our shipment will appear. We should ensure that the items displayed match the items that our company received. We can click on the Edit button in the top left, or the small pencil icon next to each line of our shipment, and then select the number of products you have received. If your product requires tracking by lot or by serial number, this is where you will assign those values. If you have received all of the products in your shipment, the number of products you have received in the Done column will match those in the To Do column. When this happens, the line will turn green and you're finished. You can now click Validate at the top of the screen and the status will change to Done in the top right. Now we have received the products into our warehouse. Now that we've received the products into our warehouse, we'll have to pay for them. In the KiuERP system, we can create a vendor bill, which will be the last step in our purchasing process. Click on the purchase order number in the top left of your screen to navigate back to the purchase order view. You will see the shipment and vendor bills icons in the top right of the screen. Click on the vendor bills icon, and when the screen refreshes, click the Create button. The vendor bill will be pre-populated with all of the information from your purchase already. If you have received all of the products in your purchase order, it will reflect that. If you have only received a partial shipment, the vendor bill will automatically update for the quantity received. When you are satisfied that the information matches what you have received, click Validate. At this point, the vendor bill is only a draft vendor bill, which is the last step in the purchasing process using the KiuERP system. To create a final vendor bill, the accountant or manager will work in the accounting module to register the payment, which we will cover in a different session. Now that we've completed the purchasing process, let's briefly look at the reporting options you can use in KiuERP. Click on Reports from the menu at the top of your screen, and you'll see that there are many reporting options that you're able to select now. If you click on an expanded view, you can choose any of the other options that you want to see. So we can see purchases by companies where we have only Q as a company. We can see purchases by order time. And then within that time, we can see purchases by vendor. If we choose the minus icon, any of the smaller versions will go away, and now we can choose something else. Similarly, to add columns to the screen, we can add those using the measures field. If we choose days to validate becomes a new column in the analysis that we see. We can also switch to a bar chart using this icon in the top right. And then view different by company. Now that we've looked a bit at the reporting functionality, let's go back to our presentation to review what we've learned. In this purchasing presentation, we've learned how to create a request for quotation, create a purchase tender, create a blanket order, create a purchase order, receive goods into a warehouse, and create a draft supplier bill. That's all that we'll have for today's lesson on purchasing. So let's take a few minutes. We'll have another break where you can ask some questions, and then we'll shortly go on to the sales module.